Konbanwa, bakusei tachi. I'm Puppy-sensei. I am your puppy girl Japanese teacher VTuber who makes Japanese language content to help you level up your abilities. I want to do something a little bit different for this grammar drop. Lately, we've been trying to hone in on some very introductory topics in Japanese. In fact, I think you could say that the new theme for my content in 2026 really has been getting back to the basics. I've been at this for a little bit now, and as I'm fond of saying, I came into the content creation sphere knowing nothing. Go back and watch some of my earliest videos, and you will see I really did not know what I was doing when it came to making videos. But one thing I've always been passionate about is trying my best to make content that gets you inspired to learn. Well, for today's grammar drop, I thought we would try something quite a bit different. And even though it actually veers a little far away from the topic of grammar per se, I thought I would talk to you about the word ie. Ie in Japanese. No, the word for no in Japanese. Ie. What is this word? What does it mean? Why is it a little bit rare? And how come it's causing some interesting problems for language learners who are traveling in Japan? With that in mind, I give you a title card. Look at us getting all polished and professional like. So, today we are going to talk at a very meta level about saying no in Japanese. I want you to know up front, a lot of what we're going to be talking about today really comes from my own observations. This isn't necessarily the kind of deep dive into factual grammar that I normally do for these grammar drops. But I thought it would be a good topic for us to talk about, and I think it might even be a little bit fun. Open any introductory Japanese textbook, and one of the things that you're very quickly going to be taught is that if you were to ask someone out on a date when you're in Japan, you are far more likely to get a reply like "chotto" than you would to get a reply like an overt "yeah, no, I don't wanna." So this word is "chotto." Ordinarily, "chotto" means just a little bit. It's a little something or another. I've seen this scenario worded in a way that, well, I've probably seen it in about a dozen Japanese textbooks, and it's always couched in this, like, relatively banal high school kind of purity. It's really frequently paired with a lesson on the let's do form in Japanese as well, with examples much like this one. Alright, so in this little dialogue, we have the first person saying, 金曜日一緒に映画を見ましょうか? Shall we go together to see a movie on Friday? Now, as I was saying, this is one of the let's do forms in Japanese. The verb here has been conjugated into mimashou. Miru is the verb that means to see. Mimashou would mean something like shall we do or let's do. With the addition of ka at the end, mimashou ka becomes something like why don't we? Wouldn't you like to? And then person B is giving us a response here, and that response is chotto. Here, this chotto is always explained to mean something like that would be a little bit, as in that would be somewhat inconvenient, I have conflicting plans, that would cause me some kind of problem. Or, I've even seen a case in one textbook where it presented this scenario and said something along the lines of, actually this guy is really, really gross and she doesn't want to go anywhere at all near him, but she has to say chotto instead of screaming and running away. Oftentimes, this kind of like asking someone out on a date scenario is very much presented with some very heavy that's rough buddy type vibes. And we're led to believe that this would you like to do whatever slash chotto interaction is kind of limited to asking people out in Japanese. And listen, I really think that that gives absolutely the wrong vibe. First of all, it's almost always presented as a young man asking a young woman to do something that could easily be construed as a date, like go out to the movies. And the young woman's motivations are very rarely actually explored outside of her wanting to express that she either cannot or doesn't want to attend the activity. But according to these textbooks, she's unable to say no directly, so she responds chotto, right? And the textbooks will often say something along the lines of, oh, in Japanese, it's really rare to just overtly say iie. You usually don't just turn people down because, it disrupts social order or something like that. In essence, more often than not, the way these textbooks present this problem of letting people down easily is, in my opinion, well, not only is it giving the readers the wrong idea, but it's also, pretty heckin' misogynistic. And the reason I say this is because a cultural avoidance of saying no is in no way limited to this very specific, please go on a date with me, teehee, that would be a little bit 10-10-10 kind of schema, right? It's so much more broad than that. The cultural avoidance of just telling people no really hits almost every level of social life in Japan. It's not a gendered aspect of Japanese culture either, nor is it some brutish act of coquettish behavior, and it's certainly not evidence of the submissiveness of Japanese women. No, this is a problem that everyone faces. It's just that in Japan, it's very rare to just tell somebody no. It shuts down the conversation. It ends the dialogue. And we already know, based on lots of conversations that we've had, Japanese has this kind of built-in desire to keep the conversation going. That's why we have particles like ne at the end, right? Ne invites participation in the conversation, whereas ie ends the conversation, and usually that wants to be avoided, right? Listen, I've said this many times, but it's my opinion that Japanese society is not without problems, and a good deal of them are deeply systemic. The treatment of women within Japanese society is probably one of the forefront issues that I, really believe is kind of a general cultural problem. But one of the things that I do think is very cool about the Japanese culture is a kind of desire for societal harmony. Please notice here I'm using the word harmony and not order. If we're going to discuss societal harmony, then I think that we have to address this very famous Japanese proverb. Deru kui wa utareru. Deru kui wa utareru. Usually, deru kui wa utareru gets translated as the nail that sticks out is going to get hammered down. I think, and listen, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. I think this proverb is a little bit misunderstood. People often cite this proverb from the perspective of arguing that Japan has this idea where people who are weird or different are automatically shunned. Because I think people misunderstand the difference between societal harmony and societal order, and therefore they adopt a belief in things like, you can't go to Japan if you have blue hair because deru kui wa utareru, you're gonna get hammered down. But this misunderstanding, I think, comes from the fact that this proverb is actually intended to say more about the people doing the hammering than it is about the one being hammered down. That is to say, this proverb is a warning. And that warning is, if you stick out too much, dumb people around you are going to hammer you down. In your sticking out, your being different, in your being individual, people around you will judge you poorly. To be honest, oftentimes this proverb is even used when someone stands out for very positive reasons. Okay, so here's a little dialogue that I've set up. And in this dialogue, we have two friends, and they're talking about their other friend, Matsui-san. Matsui-san is clearly a very great student because we get in the dialogue here, person A saying, Matsui-san wa sasuga shiken de e o torimashita. Okay, that's a sentence that means, as expected, Matsui-san got an A on the test. Sasuga is here implying that something is inevitable. It was bound to happen, right? And so we get this meaning of course Matsui-san got an A on the test. Obviously he did, because he's very, very, very smart. And then person B is responding, Ma ne, deru koi wa utareru. And that kind of means something like, yeah, well, the nail that sticks out is gonna get hammered down. The deployment of derukue wa utareru is just as common in a case like this, where the nail is actually too positive. Yes, it's true that the nail could be hammered down for being too weird or lacking in some way, but you can totally get hammered down for being too good, too popular, too pretentious, too frequently winning. The important takeaway is that I believe that within Japanese culture, there's really this idea that we should work hard to keep everyone happy, even if sometimes that means keeping your head down a little bit and not being too boastful. I was in Harajuku one time and I saw this billboard. On the billboard, there were like a dozen students. They were all dressed in identical school uniforms, and they had really similar haircuts. They were all lined up in a gym, probably getting ready to have a class picture done, which is probably what we are actually seeing on the billboard. From their feet up, they all pretty much looked like they conformed to some really basic social standard. Their uniform was neatly pressed, their hair was neatly combed, their teeth were brushed, their skincare routine had been well maintained, etc., etc. But their shoes told a different story. Each of their shoes were different. Each of their shoes had unique, vibrant colors. Each of their shoes expressed their individuality. It was actually a sneaker ad, and in Japanese, it said something about feeling free to express your individuality and having the spirit of being able to say who you are. Now, maybe this ad was being tongue-in-cheek. Maybe the fact that we saw these, very, very different shoes juxtaposed against some exactly the same school uniforms, maybe that was supposed to be funny. Or maybe this was just a true celebration of diversity. I don't know. But I do know that the belief that individuality is not at all celebrated in Japan is wrong-headed. And I know this because if pure individuality was not celebrated at least a little bit in Japan, then how could anime possibly be a thing, right? I think it's very, very common to travel on a train in Japan and see a businessman reading his favorite manga, right? And everyone has their favorite. And your favorite is something that you can be very individual about. It's something that you can celebrate. It's something that shows your diversity, right? And that's just one small example that, yes, I think Japan does celebrate individuality, but not at the cost of social harmony. Now, let's get back on track. I will reiterate that I believe the desire to maintain social harmony is tied directly to this problem of denial using chotto rather than iie, right? There is social pressure to avoid saying no directly. It is seen as rude and abrasive, and it chafes at the idea that the needs of the most people are more important than the needs of a few people, or, something very Star Trek like. I'm not saying that that's always a good thing. Heck, I'm not even saying that this idea of the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few is really a social good at all. In fact, it's kind of a problem. But I am saying that a good deal of emphasis in Japan is honestly placed on maintaining a balance as to whether it's better to yes and continue a conversation, or it's better to shut down the conversation completely with a no. I'd like to provide you with an interesting example that I have been reading about a lot lately. As tourism, and of course over-tourism, have been on the rise in Japan, the need to avoid saying no has led to a lot of tourists actually getting wrong information from Japanese locals. There's a scenario that tends to play out something like this. So you have an obvious tourist, obvious foreigner, and they approach a Japanese local and they say something along the lines of, すみませんが、この電車は京都駅に止まる電車ですか? Excuse me, does this train stop at Kyoto Station? And then the Japanese local is responding something like, その通りです, and then quickly shuffling away as far as possible. Let's examine this scenario, right? We've got our non-native tourist seeking some kind of information, asking, is this the train that goes to Kyoto? And then we have our local who is like, yep, and then running away. Except, here's the thing. The train that the tourist was asking about does not go to Kyoto Station. It doesn't go to Kyoto Station. It is the wrong train. It is headed the wrong way. And we see this happening from time to time. So why the heck did this tourist just get overtly lied to? Why have they been led down a path that's very likely going to cost them precious time and money? Let's think about a couple options. Option 1. This could be overt xenophobia. It could be the case that the Japanese local is just like, heh heh heh, stupid American, I shall waste your time. And yeah, you could say that evidence for this is supported by the person giving them advice, that advice being wrong, and then shuffling far away, far to the end of the train, clearly, obviously, to watch the fruits of their deception from far away without fear of retribution. Right? Right? But does that really sync up with what we know about Japanese people? Are Japanese people usually vindictive in this way? Not really. I mean, sure, everyone is different. There could definitely be a situation where somebody is just clearly that mean. But let's consider another option, okay? Maybe it's because of over-tourism. Maybe the local is thinking, gosh, there are so many tourists lately. It makes my life very difficult. The trains are more crowded, places are more crowded, it's hard to go to the touristy spots, so I'm gonna make this loud American go the wrong way so that people won't want to travel here anymore. Except that that's really counterproductive. Ultimately, that just increases the amount of congestion and traffic in Japan by making this hapless tourist take an extra train back in the right direction. And it also really goes against this whole idea of maintaining a social harmony. And so, again, I am only speaking from my own conjecture here, but I would like to posit an option 3, which I find to be the most wholesome, and also, from my particular point of view, maybe the most likely option. Option 3. it's because the local is way too shy to say no. This might sound really counterintuitive, but to illustrate this point, I want to tell you a very deep and incredibly shameful story from my past. Okay, I'm massively exaggerating. This is neither deep nor is it all that shameful. And actually, I believe it's a really relatable story from my own life. When I was quite a bit younger, I was really, really, really heckin' shy. Okay, I'm still really heckin' shy, but which one of us is telling the story anyway? I was shy. I was isolated. I didn't have a whole lot of friends. One day, I went to a local anime shop, and while I was walking around and shopping, some kinda cute guy came up and he started talking to me. I was a bit flustered, and in my little bit of a flustered state, he asked me if I had played some specific video game. I don't remember what game it was, but regardless, I can tell you conclusively, I had never played that game before. That maybe shouldn't come as too much of a surprise to those of you who have watched my playthroughs, because y'all already know that before I started streaming, I really hadn't played that many games. But in that moment, I was feeling weird and shy and vulnerable, and I kinda unintentionally blurted out that I had played that game in answer to his question. And what followed was about 15 minutes of that guy peppering me with questions about the game, about my character in the game, and me completely making stuff up on the fly as I desperately tried to convince this guy that I knew so much about a game that I probably hadn't even heard of before that day. I don't know if you will find that feeling relatable or not, but looking back on it, I kinda have to forgive my younger self, because nothing I did was malicious. I wasn't lying because I wanted to deceive anyone. I wasn't lying because I was trying to get attention. If anything, I wanted out of the spotlight. I felt like a lot of attention had been put on me, and I panicked. I was mortified the moment the first lie came out of my mouth, and I continued to be mortified the deeper and deeper my web of lies became. But I know myself, and I know now what I did not know then. When you're suddenly put on the spot, and you're nervous, and you're shy, sometimes it's just far more natural to blurt out, "Yeah, of course," than it is to say, "I have to admit, I don't know for sure," right? At the time, I wasn't thinking, I want to look cool in this moment. That wasn't a motivation of mine. I didn't know this guy, right? I didn't know this guy at all. I was just kind of trying to keep the conversation going. But I was too shy and too vulnerable to put myself in the position of saying, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe this is part of why I really love being a teacher. Because the me today would want to take a situation like this, one where I did not know the answer, and then I would want to use it as a way for us to learn together. I would want to admit, I don't know the answer to that question, but let's find out together. Anyway, that's all kind of beside the point. Let's get back to our hapless American tourist. In the world that I'm proposing, this very obvious tourist approaches a local and they ask their question, does this train go to Kyoto Station? And in the moment, the local Japanese person absolutely panics. They suddenly find themselves in a situation where the American is talking to me. And in the moment, they just blurt out the first thing that comes to their mind. I've personally had this kind of weird experience when talking to Japanese people, sometimes there's this kind of fear or this anxiety that plays in where the person I'm talking to is like, oh no, it's a foreigner. Oh no, they're talking to me. Oh no, I don't want anyone to know that my English is not very good. I've actually been in restaurants and I have ordered food in Japanese only to have the waitress say to me, I'm sorry, I don't speak English. Cool. I didn't speak English. Actually, there's a very funny video about this. I'll link it in the description, but I've actually had this exact kind of interaction where I have been speaking Japanese and had somebody say, I'm sorry, I can't understand you because I don't speak English. I want to be honest. I'm not sure that what's happening there is xenophobic. I think it's shyness. I think that in the case of this Kyoto Station example that we were exploring, I think the Japanese person just gets spooked. They give wrong information because they're too shy to continue the conversation, but also they're culturally incentivized not to say no. Remember, chotto. And then they shuffle away, not because they want to, watch like an evil person from the corner of the train. They do it because they're too shy to continue the conversation, and they might even regret that they already know that they gave wrong information, but they're in too deep to fix it. They don't want to admit that they made a mistake. Anyway, all of this is basically just my opinion, but let's assume that I'm right. What can you do about this? It's my humble opinion that often, when speaking Japanese to native Japanese speakers, we probably ought to avoid yes or no questions. We already know that there's a cultural tendency to avoid saying no in many different social situations. And if that's the case, then offering a yes or no is actually a false choice, isn't it? Instead, may I recommend rephrasing your questions as seeking very specific answers, seeking specific information rather than a yes-no. So if we rewrite our dialogue from before, it becomes, すみませんが、京都駅に止まる電車はどちらですか? Excuse me, which of these trains goes to Kyoto? And then, in that case, the local might be more incentivized to answer, あそこの電車です. It's that one over there. Right? Can't just say yes, because that's not the answer to the question. I don't know. I could be wrong. I admit it. I could be wrong about all this. But from what I do know in my own travels in Japan, I tend to see the Japanese culture as very endearing and shy and very concerned about keeping everyone happy. But, maybe I'm just projecting because that kind of describes me too. Anyway, that's all for today. Back for more regular grammatical content next week. Thank you for letting me do a little bit of the side. I just wanted to talk about this, so I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Until next time. また来週